The autumn sun climbed over Atlanta's skyline, casting long amber shadows across Peachtree Street as the city stirred to life. It was one of those rare October mornings when the Georgia heat finally surrendered, leaving behind crisp air that smelled of dry leaves and distant wood smoke. Lieutenant Sarah Collins stood at the window of the K-9 unit headquarters, a ceramic mug warming her hands, watching the golden light paint the buildings in shades of honey and rust. Behind her, Max lay on his designated spot near her desk, his dark eyes tracking every movement she made, his ears rotating like satellite dishes picking up signals only he could understand. The calm shattered at exactly 7:43. Sarah's phone buzzed against the metal desk, and she recognized Captain Morrison's number before she even glanced at the screen. She answered on the second ring, her voice steady despite the instinctive tightening in her chest that always accompanied early morning calls. In her experience, calls at this hour never brought good news. They brought bodies and missing persons, domestic disputes turned violent and accidents that had destroyed families in the span of seconds. They brought the work that defined her existence, the weight that she had chosen to carry. Collins here. Sarah, we've got a missing person case that just escalated. Elena Vance, 29 years old, nurse at Grady Memorial. She left her house yesterday morning to run errands and never came back. Her mother called it in last night, but patrol thought she might have just needed space. Now we've got her car abandoned at a strip mall on Buford Highway. Driver's door still open, purse on the passenger seat. Sarah set down her mug. Max's head lifted immediately, sensing the shift in her energy. His ears rotated toward her, his dark eyes sharpening with the focus that separated him from ordinary dogs. He had spent 7 years learning to read her moods, her body language, the subtle signals that indicated when playtime was over and work had begun. Kids? Twin boys, 4 years old. They're with the grandmother now. The woman is beside herself. Text me the address. Max and I are rolling in 5. She ended the call and grabbed her jacket from the back of her chair. Max was already on his feet, his lean, muscular body vibrating with contained energy, his black and tan coat gleaming under the fluorescent lights. He knew the routine. He knew the weight of her movements when a case mattered. And somehow, in that inexplicable way that made him invaluable, he already knew this one would demand everything they had. The drive to the strip mall took 22 minutes through moderate traffic. Sarah used the time to review what little information dispatch had forwarded to her tablet. Elena Vance. Born in Savannah, moved to Atlanta 8 years ago for nursing school. Single mother. The father of her twins had died in a construction accident before the boys were born. She worked night shifts at Grady Memorial, was known as reliable and kind, had no criminal record, no history of mental health crises, no known enemies. The kind of woman who slipped through life trying to do right by everyone around her. The strip mall sat at the intersection of Buford Highway and Claremont Road, a tired collection of storefronts that included a nail salon, a payday loan office, a Vietnamese restaurant, and a bank branch that had seen better decades. Yellow crime scene tape cordoned off the northeast corner of the parking lot, where a silver Honda Civic sat at an awkward angle, its driver's door hanging open like a broken wing. Sarah parked her unmarked SUV and clipped Max's working lead to his tactical harness. The moment his paws hit the asphalt, his demeanor shifted completely. Gone was the playful companion who sometimes stole socks from her laundry basket. In his place stood a focused professional, nose already working the air, cataloging scents that human senses could never detect. Detective Marcus Webb approached from the perimeter, his notepad clutched in one hand, his face carrying the exhausted weight of a man who had been on scene for hours. "Lieutenant, glad you're here. Walk me through it." Webb gestured toward the Civic. Vehicle was spotted by a patrol unit around 11 last night. Engine was off, but keys were still in the ignition. purse on the seat contained her wallet, phone, and about $40 cash. No signs of struggle inside the vehicle, but there are scuff marks on the asphalt near the driver's door. Could be nothing. Could be everything. Sarah crouched near the scuff marks, studying them with practiced eyes. They were faint, barely visible against the sun-bleached pavement, but they told a story. Someone had dragged their feet. Someone had resisted. Witnesses. The nail salon owner remembers seeing the Civic pull in around 9 in the morning yesterday. She didn't see anyone get out. The Vietnamese place doesn't open until 11, and the loan office clerk was dealing with customers inside. Nobody saw anything useful. What about the bank? Webb's expression shifted slightly. That's where it gets interesting. Elena made a deposit at the ATM around 9:15. We've got footage of her walking from her car to the machine. She completed the transaction, but she never walked back. The camera angle doesn't cover the parking lot, so we lose her after she steps off the sidewalk. 9:15 to 11 last night. That's over 13 hours unaccounted for. 14, actually. We're looking at a window that keeps getting wider. Sarah stood and looked at Max. He was staring at the open car door, his nostrils flaring rhythmically, his body completely still, except for the slight tremor in his haunches that indicated he had already found something worth pursuing. I need access to that car. Webb nodded and led her past the tape. The forensic team had already processed the interior, lifting prints and collecting fibers, but they had left the vehicle in place at Sarah's earlier request. She opened the passenger door and retrieved a light blue scarf that hung from the rearview mirror. It smelled faintly of vanilla and something floral. Elena's scent. She held it out to Max. He inhaled deeply, his eyes closing momentarily as he committed the scent to memory. When he opened them again, there was a new intensity in his gaze, a laser focus that Sarah had seen dozens of times before. He had the trail. Such, she commanded softly, using the German word for search that Max had been trained with. Max lowered his nose to the ground and began working in widening circles around the Civic. His movements were methodical, almost mechanical, as he filtered through the countless scents that layered the parking lot asphalt. Exhaust fumes, food grease, human sweat, spilled gasoline, rubber from 1,000 tires. And somewhere beneath all of that, the delicate thread of vanilla and flowers that would lead them to Elena Vance. He found it near the edge of the parking lot, where the asphalt gave way to a narrow strip of dying grass and a chain-link fence. His head snapped up, ears forward, tail rigid. He looked back at Sarah with an expression she knew intimately. He had the scent. He knew which way she had gone. "Good boy," Sarah murmured, moving to his side. "Show me." Max led her along the fence line to a gap where the chain link had been cut and peeled back, creating an opening just large enough for a person to squeeze through. On the other side lay a service alley that ran behind the strip mall, littered with dumpsters and stacked pallets, and the accumulated debris of commercial neglect. Sarah photographed the cut fence and transmitted the image to Webb before following Max through the gap. The alley stretched for perhaps 200 yards before terminating at another fence, this one topped with rusted barbed wire. Max moved with confidence, his nose hovering inches above the cracked concrete, his pace steady but urgent. Halfway down the alley, he stopped. Sarah felt her stomach tighten. Max's stops were never random. They always meant something. He was standing beside a dumpster, his body rigid, his attention fixed on a dark stain on the ground. Sarah crouched and examined it with gloved fingers. It was dry now, but the color and consistency were unmistakable. Blood, not a massive amount, but enough to indicate injury. Enough to confirm that Elena Vance had not left this alley willingly. She marked the location with a small evidence flag from her kit and photographed the stain from multiple angles. Max waited patiently, understanding that the work required pauses, required documentation, required the methodical accumulation of proof that would eventually build a case. "Okay, buddy. Keep going." Oh! The trail led to the end of the alley, through another gap in the fence, and into a narrow side street that Sarah recognized as part of the warehouse district that bordered Buford Highway. The buildings here were old, mostly abandoned, their windows boarded and their walls tagged with layers of graffiti that chronicled decades of urban decay. Max's pace slowed. The scent was becoming diffuse, contaminated by vehicle exhaust and the passage of time. He circled twice, whined softly, then sat down and looked at Sarah with apologetic eyes. "It's okay," she said, rubbing his ears. "You did great. They put her in a vehicle here." She stood and surveyed the street. 3 buildings had direct access to this location: a former textile warehouse with a collapsed roof, a brick structure that might have once been an office building, and a 2-story concrete box with loading dock doors that still appeared functional. Her radio crackled. "Lieutenant Collins, this is Webb. We've got something at the bank. You're going to want to see this." Sarah and Max made their way back through the alleys to the strip mall. The walk gave her time to process what they had found. Elena had been taken from the parking lot, dragged or forced through a cut fence, injured in the alley, and loaded into a vehicle in the warehouse district. The sophistication of the abduction suggested planning. Someone had known she would be at that bank at that time. Someone had been waiting. Webb met her at the bank's glass doors, his expression grim. The branch manager just arrived. I showed him Elena's photo. He recognized her immediately. "She's a customer?" "More than that. She was here 2 days ago, Lieutenant, not at the ATM, inside. She came to report something she witnessed during a previous visit." Sarah felt the pieces beginning to shift. What did she witness? Webb glanced around, then lowered his voice. "About a week ago, Elena came in to deposit her paycheck. While she was waiting in line, she saw a man she recognized from the hospital, a patient who had been admitted for a minor procedure and paid his entire bill in cash, over $30,000. She thought it was strange at the time, but didn't think much of it until she saw him here at this bank, handing a teller a duffel bag full of cash. How much cash? The manager wouldn't give me exact figures without a warrant, but he implied it was a significant amount, enough to trigger a currency transaction report. Did she give a statement? She started to, but the manager says she got spooked halfway through. Said she needed to think about it, that she had kids to worry about. She left without signing anything official. Sarah's mind raced. Elena had witnessed something she shouldn't have. A cash transaction large enough to draw attention, connected to a man who had already demonstrated a pattern of moving large sums without traceable records. She had tried to report it, then changed her mind, but someone had found out anyway. I need to know who that man was, the patient from Grady Memorial. Working on it. The manager is pulling the transaction records now, but he's nervous, says there might be liability issues. Tell him there's a woman missing and 2 little boys who want their mother back. Tell him liability is the least of his concerns if he doesn't cooperate. Webb nodded and disappeared back into the bank. Sarah walked to a bench near the entrance and sat down, letting Max rest beside her. The Belgian Malinois laid his head on her thigh, his dark eyes watching the parking lot with vigilant calm. "We're going to find her," Sarah whispered, more to herself than to Max. "We have to." Her phone buzzed with an incoming message from the precinct. The forensic team had confirmed that the blood in the alley matched Elena's type. They were running DNA now, but the preliminary results were enough to reclassify the case. This was no longer a missing person investigation. It was a kidnapping. The grandmother's house was a modest ranch-style home in a quiet neighborhood south of the airport. The lawn was neatly trimmed, the flower beds carefully tended, and a pair of small bicycles with training wheels sat abandoned on the front porch. Sarah parked on the street and instructed Max to stay in the vehicle with the windows cracked. This wasn't a tactical situation. This was a conversation that required human compassion, not canine efficiency. Dorothy Vance answered the door before Sarah could knock. She was a small woman in her early 60s, her silver hair pulled back in a hasty ponytail, her eyes red-rimmed and swollen from crying. Behind her, Sarah could see the living room, where two identical boys sat on a worn sofa, their small hands clutching matching stuffed elephants. "Mrs. Vance? I'm Lieutenant Sarah Collins with the Atlanta Police Department. I'm leading the investigation into your daughter's disappearance." Dorothy's face crumpled. "Have you found her? Please tell me you found her." "Not yet, Ma'am, but I promise you, we're doing everything possible. May I come in?" The interior of the house smelled like cinnamon and grief. Dorothy led Sarah past the living room, where the twins tracked her with enormous brown eyes that looked far too old for 4-year-old faces. They didn't speak. They didn't move. They simply watched, as if waiting for someone to explain why their world had suddenly stopped making sense. Sarah and Dorothy sat at the kitchen table, a pot of untouched coffee growing cold between them. "Mrs. Vance, I need to ask you some questions that might seem strange, but I promise they're important." Dorothy nodded, her hands wrapped around a mug she wasn't drinking from. "Did Elena mention anything unusual in the past 2 weeks? Any concerns about work, about money, about anyone she might have encountered?" The older woman was quiet for a long moment. She was worried about something. I could tell. Elena's never been good at hiding her feelings, not from me. About a week ago, she came by to drop off the boys and she seemed distracted. I asked her what was wrong, and she said she saw something that bothered her, something at the bank. "Did she tell you what she saw?" "No. She said it was probably nothing, that she was overreacting. But I could see it was eating at her. The next day, she mentioned she was thinking about talking to someone, maybe the police, but she wasn't sure. She was scared of getting involved in something that wasn't her business." "Did she mention any names? Anyone from the hospital? Anyone from the bank?" Dorothy shook her head slowly. She kept it vague. "You know how Elena is. She doesn't like to burden anyone with her problems. She's been that way since she was a little girl, always trying to handle everything on her own." Sarah thought about the woman in the photos she had studied, the tired smile, the determined eyes, the gentle hands resting on the shoulders of her twin sons. A woman who worked night shifts to provide for her children, who visited her mother regularly, who tried to do the right thing even when it frightened her. "Mrs. Vance, I need you to understand something. We believe Elena witnessed a serious crime, and we believe that's why she was taken. The people who took her don't want her to talk about what she saw. That means we have a very limited window to find her before they decide she's too much of a risk to keep alive." Dorothy's coffee mug slipped from her fingers and shattered on the floor, but she didn't seem to notice. Her entire body had gone rigid, her face draining of color. "My baby. My Elena. Oh, God. I'm going to find her. I need you to believe that, but I need your help. Is there anything else, anything at all that might tell us where to look?" Through her tears, Dorothy whispered, "Her phone. She kept notes on her phone. A diary app, she called it. If she wrote down what she saw, it would be there. We have her phone. It was in her car. Do you have the password?" Sarah shook her head. Dorothy stood on shaking legs and walked to a corkboard mounted on the kitchen wall. Among the coupons and school notices and crayon drawings, she found a small sticky note with a 6-digit number written in faded pencil. "She gave me this in case of emergencies. Said if anything ever happened to her, I should give it to the police." Sarah took the note with careful hands. "This could help us find her, Mrs. Vance. You may have just saved your daughter's life." She left the house with the note tucked safely in her jacket pocket and a weight on her chest that made breathing difficult. As she approached her SUV, she glanced back at the front window. 2 small faces were pressed against the glass, watching her leave, their stuffed elephants clutched to their chests. She made a silent promise to those boys, a promise she intended to keep. Back at the precinct, Sarah handed Elena's phone to Detective Chen, the department's digital forensics specialist. The password worked on the first try, unlocking a trove of information that had been hidden behind the lock screen. While Chen began his examination, Sarah updated Captain Morrison on the investigation's progress. "So, we're looking at a kidnapping connected to financial crimes," Morrison summarized. His weathered face creased with concern. "Any idea who the players are?" "Not yet. The bank manager is cooperating now, but he's slow-walking the paperwork. The man Elena saw making the cash deposit was named Raymond Garrett, former patient at Grady Memorial, admitted 3 weeks ago for what was listed as a minor cardiac procedure. He paid his bill in cash, all $37,000 of it. That's not illegal." "No, sir, but it is unusual. And when Elena saw him depositing an even larger sum at the bank, she started connecting dots. Someone found out she was asking questions, and they grabbed her before she could talk to anyone official." Morrison leaned back in his chair. "You think Garrett is our kidnapper?" "I think Garrett is a piece of a bigger puzzle. The kind of money we're talking about doesn't come from one person running a side hustle. This is organized, structured. Someone is washing cash through multiple channels, and Elena stumbled into the middle of it." "What do you need?" "Warrants for Garrett's financial records, his employment history, his known associates. I also want to search those warehouses near the abduction site. Max tracked Elena's scent to that area before we lost it. I think she was held there, at least temporarily, before they moved her." Morrison reached for his phone. "I'll have the paperwork ready within the hour. In the meantime, what's your gut telling you?" Sarah thought about the blood in the alley, the cut fence, the calculated efficiency of the abduction. "My gut is telling me we're running out of time." Detective Chen appeared in the doorway, his face animated with the kind of controlled excitement that meant he had found something significant. "Lieutenant, you need to see this." The digital forensics lab was a cramped room, filled with monitors and cables, and the persistent hum of cooling fans. Chen led Sarah to his primary workstation, where Elena's phone was connected to a diagnostic cable, its contents displayed on a large screen. "She did keep a diary," Chen explained, scrolling through entries. "Most of it is mundane stuff, work schedules, the boys' doctor appointments, grocery lists, but look at this entry from 8 days ago." The text on the screen made Sarah's pulse quicken. "Saw something strange at the bank today. A man I recognized from work was depositing a huge amount of cash. I mean, huge." The teller's eyes went wide. "I know it's not my business, but something feels wrong. He paid his hospital bill in cash too. Who carries around that much money? And why did he look so nervous when he saw me watching? I'm probably being paranoid. I'll think about it for a few days before I do anything." Chen scrolled further. 3 days ago. I can't stop thinking about it. I did some research online. There's something called money laundering, where criminals clean their illegal money by putting it through legitimate businesses. What if that's what I saw, but I don't want to get involved? I have the boys to think about. What if these people are dangerous? What if they find out I noticed 2 days ago? I talked to the bank manager today. I didn't give a full statement, but I asked some hypothetical questions. He seemed interested at first, then he got weird, kept looking over his shoulder, said he'd call me back. I have a bad feeling about this. Maybe I should have kept my mouth shut. The entry from the day before her disappearance was the most chilling. I think someone is following me. I noticed a black SUV parked outside the hospital when I left work yesterday. Same SUV was on my street this morning. I'm scared. If something happens to me, the man's name is Raymond Garrett. He works at a company called Meridian Logistics. Please take care of my boys." Sarah stared at the screen, her jaw tight. Elena had known something was wrong. She had tried to protect herself. tried to document what she knew, tried to leave a trail for someone to follow, and now that someone was Sarah. "Meridian Logistics," she said. "Find out everything you can about that company." Chen was already typing. Within minutes, basic information began populating his screen. Meridian Logistics was a freight and shipping company headquartered in an industrial park on the south side of Atlanta. They specialized in regional transportation, moving goods between warehouses and distribution centers throughout the southeast. On paper, they appeared legitimate. They had proper licensing, a modest fleet of trucks, and a small staff of drivers and administrative personnel. But paper could lie. The company was incorporated 6 years ago, Chen noted. Ownership is buried under 3 layers of holding companies, all registered in Delaware. Classic shell game. Makes it almost impossible to identify who's actually running the operation. Pull their shipping manifests for the past 3 months. Cross-reference them with any unusual financial activity flagged by the banks. That could take hours. Then you better start now. Sarah left Chen to his work and returned to the K9 unit headquarters, where Max had been waiting with patient loyalty. She filled his water bowl, checked his food supply, and spent a few minutes simply sitting with him on the floor, letting his steady presence calm her racing thoughts. "We're getting closer," she told him. "I can feel it. We just need one more piece to fall into place." Max nuzzled her hand, his warm breath soft against her palm. He understood the weight she carried. He always had. The hours between Chen's discovery and the warrant's arrival were among the longest of Sarah's career. She used them productively, coordinating with other units, briefing Captain Morrison on the investigation's progress, reviewing satellite imagery of the warehouse district where Max had lost Elena's scent. But productivity could not silence the clock ticking in her mind, counting down seconds that Elena Vance might not have. She made 2 more calls to Dorothy Vance, brief check-ins that served no practical purpose but felt necessary nonetheless. The older woman's voice grew more strained with each conversation, the hope in her words increasingly desperate. The twins, she reported, had stopped asking when Mommy was coming home. They had retreated into silence, clutching their stuffed elephants, watching the door with eyes that held questions no child should have to ask. "We're doing everything we can," Sarah told her, the same phrase she had used 1,000 times in her career. It had never felt more inadequate. Officer Kim appeared at her office door around 2 in the afternoon, her expression carrying news that might be important. "Lieutenant, we got a hit on Raymond Garrett's vehicle. A black Escalade registered to him was caught on a traffic camera 3 blocks from the warehouse district yesterday afternoon. Timestamp? 2:47 p.m. That's roughly 5 hours after Elena was taken." Sarah studied the traffic camera image on Kim's tablet. The Escalade was captured mid-turn, its windows tinted too dark to reveal occupants, its license plate partially obscured by an angle that might have been accidental or might have been deliberate. But the vehicle itself was unmistakable, matching the description of the SUV that Elena had noticed following her in the days before her abduction. "Get this to the warrant request. It's more evidence connecting Garrett to the area where we lost the trail." "Already done, Lieutenant. The judge is reviewing it now." Kim left, and Sarah returned to her window, watching the afternoon shadows lengthen across the precinct parking lot. In her mind, she traced the geography of the case. The bank where Elena had made her observation. The strip mall where she had been taken, the alley where she had been injured, the warehouse district where her scent had vanished into vehicle exhaust. And somewhere beyond, the place where she was being held. The pieces were there. She just needed to fit them together. Detective Webb called at 3:15 with additional information about Meridian Logistics. The company's shipping manifests revealed a suspicious pattern of activity. Trucks leaving their warehouse in the industrial park would make stops at various locations throughout the city, including several that corresponded with banks where large cash deposits had been flagged by investigators. The trucks would then return to the warehouse, officially empty, but their weight logs told a different story. "They're using the logistics network as a cover," Webb explained. "The trucks pick up dirty cash from various collection points, bring it back to the warehouse for processing, then distribute clean money through the banking system. It's elegant, in a criminal sort of way." And Elena saw one link in the chain, a link she wasn't supposed to see. "These people are careful, Lieutenant. They've been operating for years without attracting significant attention. One nurse asking questions at a bank was enough to trigger a full extraction protocol. How big is this operation?" Webb was quiet for a moment. Big enough that the people running it would kill to protect it. Sarah thanked him and ended the call. The picture was becoming clearer, but clarity brought its own burden. Elena hadn't stumbled onto a petty crime or a minor fraud. She had wandered into the machinery of a sophisticated criminal enterprise, one that had demonstrated both the capability and the willingness to eliminate threats. Finding her alive was becoming less a probability and more a desperate hope. The warrant for the warehouse district came through at 4 in the afternoon. Sarah assembled a tactical team of 6 officers, all volunteers who understood the stakes. They moved in 3 unmarked vehicles, approaching the target zone from different directions to avoid alerting anyone who might be watching. The concrete building with the functional loading dock doors was their primary target. Max had tracked Elena's scent to the street directly in front of it, and satellite imagery from the past 48 hours showed a suspicious pattern of vehicle activity. Someone was using this building, and they weren't advertising it. Sarah positioned her team at strategic points around the structure. 2 officers covered the rear exits. 2 more secured the loading dock. Sarah and Max would enter through the front. A rusted steel door that looked like it hadn't been opened in years but showed fresh scratches around the lock. "On my signal," she murmured into her radio. 3, 2, 1, go. The lock gave way with a single, well-placed kick. Sarah swept into the building with her weapon drawn, Max at her side, his nose already working the stale air. The interior was cavernous and dark, filled with the skeletal remains of industrial machinery and the accumulated dust of neglect. Shafts of late-afternoon light penetrated through gaps in the boarded windows, illuminating floating particles that danced like microscopic ghosts. Max alerted almost immediately. His body went rigid, his tail straight, his eyes fixed on a doorway at the far end of the main floor. Sarah signaled her team and advanced carefully, checking corners and shadows, ready for threats that might materialize from any direction. The doorway led to a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Sarah activated her tactical flashlight and began the descent, Max's claws clicking softly on the concrete steps behind her. At the bottom, another door. This one was newer, heavier, clearly a recent addition to the crumbling building. She tried the handle. Locked. "Police! Open up!" No response. Sarah stepped back and nodded to Officer Patterson, who carried the battering ram. 2 strikes, and the door buckled inward, revealing a basement room that made Sarah's blood run cold. It was set up like a makeshift cell, a cot in one corner, a bucket in another, a single fluorescent light hanging from a chain, casting harsh shadows across walls that were stained with things Sarah didn't want to identify, and on the floor, partially hidden beneath a thin blanket, a blue scarf with a pattern of delicate flowers. Elena's scarf, the one Sarah had used to give Max her scent. "She was here," Sarah breathed, "recently, within the past few hours." Max circled the room, his nose cataloguing every molecule. He paused at the cot, at the bucket, at a spot on the wall where the stains were freshest. Then he moved to a second door that Sarah hadn't noticed, hidden in the shadows of the far corner. This door wasn't locked. It opened onto a tunnel, roughly 8 feet high and wide enough for a vehicle, stretching into darkness beyond the reach of her flashlight. "They moved her," Sarah said into her radio. "There's a tunnel here, probably connects to another building or exits somewhere outside our perimeter. I need units searching every structure within a quarter-mile." "Copy that, Lieutenant. Additional units are en route." Sarah made a decision. Waiting for backup was the safe play, the tactical play, but Elena didn't have time for safe. "Max, such." "Oh!" The Belgian Malinois bolted into the tunnel, his nose guiding him through the darkness with unerring precision. Sarah followed, her flashlight cutting a narrow cone of visibility through air that smelled of earth and motor oil and something else. Something metallic that she recognized as old blood. The tunnel ran for approximately 200 yards before opening into another basement. This one beneath what appeared to be a different warehouse. Machinery hummed somewhere above them. Voices echoed through ductwork that ran along the ceiling like metal arteries. Sarah killed her flashlight and let her eyes adjust. Dim light filtered through a grated opening in the floor above. Enough to see by, enough to navigate. Max had stopped at the base of a metal staircase, his attention fixed on whatever waited at the top. She climbed silently, one step at a time, her weapon leading the way. At the top, she found herself in a large open space filled with pallets of shrink-wrapped boxes and several large trucks bearing the Meridian Logistics logo. This was their operation center, their hub, and somewhere in this building, Elena Vance was waiting to be found. The warehouse floor stretched before her like a canyon of commerce, rows of shelving units rising nearly to the ceiling, creating narrow corridors that could hide anything or anyone. The trucks were parked in a loading area near a massive roll-up door, their cabs dark and silent. Forklifts sat abandoned between pallets, their operators presumably among the men Sarah could see in the office. She assessed the terrain with tactical eyes, noting potential cover positions, probable escape routes, the location of emergency exits marked by faded red signs. The space was too large for her to clear alone, but calling for backup would mean waiting, and waiting could mean losing Elena. Every instinct she had developed over 15 years of police work told her that time was the enemy now. The conversation in the office grew louder. Through the glass, she could see animated gestures, faces twisted with anger or fear. One of the men, not Garrett, was pointing at something out of her line of sight. Another was shaking his head violently. The third, Garrett himself, stood with his arms crossed, his expression suggesting a man who knew he had made a mistake and was watching its consequences unfold. Voices drew her attention to a glassed-in office space at the far end of the floor. 3 men, visible through the windows, engaged in what appeared to be a heated discussion. One of them matched the description of Raymond Garrett. The other 2 were strangers, but their body language marked them as dangerous. Sarah keyed her radio, whispering coordinates and descriptions to her team. Then she spotted something that made her heart stop. Beyond the office, in a shadowed alcove, partially hidden by stacked pallets, a figure sat slumped in a chair. Even from this distance, Sarah could see the restraints binding her wrists and ankles, could see the dark hair falling across a face that was bruised but unmistakably alive. Elena. The tactical approach would be to wait, surround the building, negotiate if necessary, but Elena's head was hanging at an angle that suggested she might be unconscious or drugged, and the men in the office were growing more agitated by the second. Whatever decision they were making, it would determine whether Elena lived or died. Sarah made her choice. She signaled Max to stay, then moved along the perimeter of the warehouse floor, using the pallets and trucks for cover. Her progress was agonizingly slow, each step calculated to avoid detection, each breath controlled to prevent even the slightest sound. The men in the office continued their argument, their voices muffled, but their gestures increasingly violent. 20 feet from Elena, then 15, then 10. The woman's eyes fluttered open. For a single terrifying moment, Sarah was certain Elena would scream, would cry out, would alert her captors to the rescue attempt unfolding in the shadows. But Elena Vance was stronger than that. She saw Sarah, saw the uniform, saw the weapon, and she remained perfectly still. Only her eyes moved, tracking Sarah's approach with desperate hope. Sarah reached the chair and knelt beside it, working the restraints with practiced fingers. The zip ties were tight, cutting into Elena's wrists, but they yielded to the blade Sarah carried for exactly this purpose. "Don't make a sound," Sarah breathed. "We're getting you out of here." Elena nodded weakly, her lips forming words she was too exhausted to speak. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." The wrist restraints fell away. Sarah started on the ankles, and then one of the men in the office looked up. Their eyes met through the glass. For a fraction of a second, neither moved. Then the man shouted, reaching for something beneath his jacket, and the warehouse erupted into chaos. Sarah pulled Elena from the chair and pushed her behind a pallet of boxes, just as the first gunshots split the air. The bullets sparked against metal somewhere to their left, followed by shouting and the thunder of running feet. Max's bark echoed through the space, a deep, commanding sound that Sarah recognized as his attack warning. "Stay down!" she ordered Elena, then rose to return fire. The three men had spread out, using the warehouse's terrain for cover. Sarah counted muzzle flashes, calculated positions, and dropped back behind a forklift as another bullet whined past her head. Her team would have heard the shots. They would be converging now, following the sounds of combat, but every second felt like an eternity when bullets were flying. Max appeared beside her, his eyes blazing with controlled fury. He understood the situation instinctively, knew that his role was not to attack blindly, but to wait for the right moment, the right target, the right opportunity to turn the tide. That moment came when Raymond Garrett attempted to flank Sarah's position from the right. He was focused on her, on the gun in her hand, on the uniform that marked her as his enemy. He didn't notice the Belgian Malinois until Max launched himself through the air, 70 pounds of muscle and teeth and righteous fury. Garrett went down screaming. His weapon clattered across the concrete floor. Max pinned him with predatory efficiency, his jaws locked around the man's forearm in a hold that would not break until Sarah gave the command. One down. Sarah used the distraction to advance on the second man, who had made the mistake of exposing his position when he turned to help his fallen colleague. Her first shot took him in the shoulder. Her second put him on the ground, alive but no longer a threat. The third man ran. Sarah pursued him through a maze of pallets and machinery, her lungs burning, her legs pumping, her entire being focused on the fleeing figure ahead of her. He crashed through a fire exit and into the fading daylight outside, where Officers Patterson and Kim were waiting. He surrendered without further resistance. Sarah walked back into the warehouse, her body shaking with adrenaline and relief. Max had not moved from his position atop Raymond Garrett, who had stopped screaming and was now whimpering pitifully beneath the dog's weight. Elena was exactly where Sarah had left her, curled behind the pallets with her arms wrapped around her knees, tears streaming silently down her bruised face. "It's over," Sarah said, kneeling beside her. "You're safe now. We're taking you home." Elena's voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. "My boys. Are my boys okay?" "They're fine. They're with your mother and they're waiting for you." The tears came harder then, great shuddering sobs that shook Elena's entire body. Sarah held her until the paramedics arrived, until the crime scene technicians began their work, until the suspects were loaded into squad cars and driven away toward justice. Max sat beside them through all of it, his work complete, his loyalty unwavering. The investigation that followed would take months to untangle. Meridian Logistics was revealed to be a front for a sophisticated money laundering operation that had been cleaning cash for multiple criminal organizations throughout the Southeast. Raymond Garrett was a mid-level accountant who had been using his hospital visits to establish a paper trail of legitimate medical expenses, then depositing the dirty money through various bank branches along a carefully designed route. Elena's accidental observation had threatened to expose the entire network. The federal agencies descended on Atlanta within 48 hours of Elena's rescue. FBI agents in crisp suits took over conference rooms at the precinct, spreading organizational charts and financial records across every available surface. DEA investigators followed threads that led to drug trafficking operations in 3 states. Treasury Department analysts mapped the flow of dirty money through a labyrinth of shell companies and offshore accounts. Sarah cooperated fully, turning over evidence and providing testimony whenever requested. But she watched the case slip away from her with a mixture of relief and regret. The bureaucracy of federal prosecution was vast and impersonal, more interested in convictions than in the human stories that had brought them there. Elena Vance became a name on a witness list, her ordeal reduced to bullet points in an indictment that ran to hundreds of pages. "They're building a RICO case," Captain Morrison explained during one of their briefings. "Racketeering charges that could bring down the entire network. Your investigation gave them the foundation they needed." "It doesn't feel like my investigation anymore." "It never does when the feds get involved. But the work you did matters, Collins. The work Max did matters. Without you two, Elena Vance would be dead, and these people would still be operating without interference." It was small comfort, but it was comfort nonetheless. 12 people were eventually arrested, including 2 employees of the bank where Eleanor had attempted to report her concerns. The bank manager who had been slow-walking his cooperation was among them. He had been alerting the criminal organization to potential whistleblowers for nearly 3 years. But that was all in the future. On the evening of Elena's rescue, there was only the drive to Dorothy Vance's modest ranch house, with Elena in the back seat of Chief Morrison's personal vehicle, too overwhelmed to speak, too grateful to stay silent. Sarah followed in her SUV with Max in the back, watching the chief's taillights cut through the purple dusk. She had argued that the chief didn't need to be involved in the transport, that a patrol unit could handle it, that there were protocols and procedures that should be observed. Morrison had overruled her. "That woman survived something terrible," he had said. "The least we can do is show her that the people in charge care about what happened to her. Besides, I want to see the look on those boys' faces when their mother comes home." Sarah understood. In a job that showed you the worst of humanity on a daily basis, moments like this were the currency that kept you going. The chief's car pulled up to the curb in front of the Vance house. The porch light was on, casting a warm golden glow across the front steps. Through the window, Sarah could see Dorothy pacing, her arms wrapped around herself, her face a mask of anxious hope. Chief Morrison opened the rear door and helped Eleanor out of the vehicle. She was unsteady on her feet, still wearing the blanket the paramedics had wrapped around her shoulders, her face puffy and discolored from her ordeal. But she was alive. She was home, and nothing else mattered. The front door opened. Dorothy Vance appeared on the threshold, her hand pressed to her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief. Behind her, pushing past her legs with the impatient urgency of childhood, came Noah and Ethan. The twins froze on the porch, their matching brown eyes fixed on the figure standing at the end of the walkway. For a moment, nobody moved. The evening air hung suspended, holding its breath along with everyone else. Then Noah whispered, "Mommy?" and Ethan screamed, "Mommy!" They launched themselves off the porch and ran down the walkway with all the speed their small legs could generate, their stuffed elephants forgotten on the steps behind them. Elena dropped to her knees and caught them both, one in each arm, pulling them against her chest with a desperate strength that seemed impossible for someone who had been through what she had endured. "My babies," she sobbed, "my beautiful, beautiful babies. Mommy's here. Mommy's home." The boys clung to her, their faces buried in her neck, their small bodies shaking with sobs that mirrored their mothers. Dorothy reached them next, wrapping her arms around all three, creating a circle of family that had been broken and was now whole again. Sarah watched from beside her SUV, Max sitting alertly at her side. Chief Morrison had stepped back, his own eyes suspiciously bright, his weathered face softened by the scene before them. Other officers had gathered at a respectful distance, drawn by the emotional gravity of the moment, reminded why they had chosen this life in the first place. Elena looked up from her sons and found Sarah's eyes across the distance. The gratitude in her gaze was beyond words, beyond expression, beyond anything that language could adequately contain. She mouthed two words that needed no voice to be understood. "Thank you." Sarah nodded, a lump in her throat making speech impossible. She reached down and ran her fingers through Max's fur, grounding herself in his solid presence, in the partnership that had made this moment possible. "We did it, buddy," she whispered. "We brought her home." Max leaned against her leg, his warmth a comfort she would never take for granted. Chief Morrison approached her as the family began to make their way inside, the twins still attached to their mother like barnacles that had no intention of ever letting go. "Hell of a job, Lieutenant, hell of a job." "It was a team effort, sir." "It always is. But you led the team. You followed the evidence when others might have given up. You made the call to go in when waiting might have cost that woman her life." He paused, his voice dropping. "I've been doing this for 32 years, Sarah. Moments like this don't come often. Savor it." She watched him walk to his car, his broad shoulders carrying the weight of 3 decades of service. Then she loaded Max into the SUV and sat behind the wheel for a long moment, staring at the house where a family was being reunited, where 2 little boys were learning that nightmares could end, where hope had defeated despair against all odds. Her phone buzzed. A text from Detective Webb. Forensic accountants found a second set of books at Meridian. "This thing is bigger than we thought. Going to be a long night." Sarah smiled wearily and typed her response. "On my way." The work never ended. The cases kept coming. The city's shadows always held new threats, new victims, new injustices waiting to be addressed. But tonight, one woman was safe. 2 children had their mother. A grandmother could finally sleep. And that was enough. Sarah started the engine and pulled away from the curb, Max settling into his familiar position in the back seat. The autumn night was cool and clear, stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky above Atlanta's glittering skyline. Somewhere in the city, criminals were plotting their next move. Somewhere, innocent people were in danger. Somewhere, another story was waiting to begin. But for now, in this moment, there was only the road ahead and the partner beside her and the quiet satisfaction of a promise kept. The Vance case file sat on Sarah's desk for 3 more months, as the investigation expanded and contracted like a living thing. What had begun as a single kidnapping had metastasized into a federal operation involving the FBI, the DEA, and the Treasury Department's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. The money laundering operation, connected to Meridian Logistics, turned out to be a tentacle of a much larger octopus, one that stretched across state lines and international borders. Sarah's role diminished as the case grew. She testified before a grand jury, provided depositions to federal prosecutors, and spent countless hours in conference rooms, explaining how she had connected the dots that led to Elena Vance's rescue. The federal agents were polite, but possessive, eager to claim credit for dismantling a criminal network that Sarah's K-9 partner had tracked through an Atlanta alley. She didn't mind. The politics of law enforcement had never interested her. What mattered was the outcome, and the outcome was justice. Raymond Garrett pleaded guilty to kidnapping, assault, and conspiracy charges in exchange for testimony against his superiors in the money laundering organization. His cooperation led to the arrest of 14 additional suspects, including the man who had ultimately ordered Elena's abduction, a Miami-based financier named Carlos Vega, who had built his empire on the drug trade's dirty money. The bank employees who had betrayed their oaths faced federal charges of their own. The manager who had tipped off the criminals about Elena's report was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. His assistant, who had helped identify potential whistleblowers among the bank's customers, received 8 years. The message was clear. Complicity had consequences. Elena Vance received a settlement from the bank's parent company, enough to pay off her modest debts and establish college funds for Noah and Ethan. She continued working at Grady Memorial, though she had transferred to the day shift to spend more time with her boys. Sarah received updates occasionally, photos forwarded through official channels showing the twins at their 5th birthday party, at their first day of kindergarten, at a Little League game where they both played on the same team. The photos always made her smile. Autumn surrendered to winter, and winter eventually yielded to spring. Atlanta's dogwoods bloomed pink and white, carpeting the city's parks and neighborhoods with delicate petals that floated on every breeze. Sarah marked her 15th year with the Atlanta Police Department, a milestone that seemed both impossibly long and surprisingly short, depending on how she measured it. Max remained her constant companion through all of it. At 7 years old, he was entering the twilight of his working career, though his skills showed no sign of diminishing. His muzzle had begun to gray, a distinguished touch that Sarah told him made him look wise. His joints were a little stiffer in the mornings, requiring a few extra minutes of stretching before he was ready for duty. But his nose was still sharp, his instincts still reliable, his loyalty still absolute. On a warm April morning, Sarah received a call that brought the Vance case back into sharp focus. "Lieutenant Collins, this is Dorothy Vance, Elena's mother." Sarah straightened in her chair, her heart rate increasing slightly. Calls from case witnesses months after closure were rarely routine. "Mrs. Vance, is everything all right?" "Everything is wonderful, Lieutenant. That's why I'm calling." The older woman's voice was warm, tinged with emotion. "The boys are having their 6th birthday party this Saturday. Elena wanted me to invite you. Both of you, actually. She said Max deserves a piece of cake, too." Sarah laughed, surprising herself. "I'm not sure cake is good for him, but I know he'd appreciate the thought." "Will you come? It would mean so much to the boys. They talk about you, you know. About the police lady and her dog who brought their mommy home. You're their heroes." The word sat heavily in Sarah's chest. Hero was a term she had always resisted, always deflected toward others who she felt deserved it more. But hearing it from this grandmother, this woman who had sat in her kitchen with cold coffee and terrified eyes, waiting for news of her missing daughter, the word meant something different. It meant hope. It meant faith restored. It meant the reason she had chosen this life in the first place. "We'll be there," Sarah said. "What time?" The birthday party was held in the backyard of Dorothy's house, the same modest ranch where Sarah had made her promise to 2 little boys 18 months earlier. Balloons in primary colors decorated the fence. A banner proclaiming "Happy Birthday, Noah and Ethan," stretched between 2 oak trees. A folding table held plates of hot dogs and chips, and a massive cake shaped like a fire truck, the twins' current obsession. The transformation of the house from a place of grief to a place of celebration struck Sarah forcefully as she pulled up to the curb. The last time she had been here, the air had been thick with fear and desperate hope. The flower beds had seemed neglected, the lawns slightly overgrown, as if even the earth itself had been holding its breath. Now everything bloomed with the abundance of a family restored. Roses climbed a trellis near the porch. Marigolds bordered the walkway in cheerful orange rows. A new swing set stood in the corner of the backyard, its plastic seats worn from enthusiastic use. Life had resumed. Life had flourished. And Sarah was here to witness the proof. Sarah arrived in civilian clothes, feeling slightly out of place among the crowd of parents and children who filled the yard with laughter and noise. Max walked beside her on his regular leash, his tactical harness replaced by a simple collar that made him look almost like a normal pet. Several heads turned as they entered through the side gate. She recognized some faces from the case file, neighbors who had been interviewed during the investigation, friends of the family who had maintained vigil during those terrible 48 hours. They regarded her with expressions that mingled gratitude and curiosity, the way people look at someone who has touched their lives during a crisis and then vanished back into the anonymous machinery of the city. A little girl in a pink dress approached Max with the fearless confidence of childhood. "Is that a police dog?" she asked, her eyes wide with wonder. "He used to be," Sarah replied. "Now he's just my friend." The girl considered this information with the seriousness it apparently deserved, then nodded and skipped away to report her findings to a group of children clustered near the swing set. Sarah watched her go, struck by the simple resilience of youth. These children would grow up hearing the story of Elena's rescue, but for them it would always be just a story, a tale from the time before their clear memories began. They would never fully understand how close the ending had come to being tragically different. Perhaps that was for the best. Elena spotted them immediately and crossed the lawn with quick steps, her face transformed by a smile that carried no shadows of her ordeal. "You came. I was worried you might not. I promised." Elena's eyes glistened. "You've kept every promise you ever made to us, Lieutenant." "Sarah, please, I'm off duty." "Sarah." Elena tested the name, found it acceptable. "The boys are going to lose their minds when they see Max. They've been asking about him for months." As if on cue, two small figures detached from a group of children near the swing set and came running across the grass with the same boundless energy Sarah remembered from their reunion with their mother. "It's the police dog! It's Max!" They skidded to a stop in front of him, their eyes wide with wonder and delight. Max, for his part, behaved with the dignified patience of a celebrity accustomed to admirers. He sat when Sarah gave the quiet command, allowing the boys to approach without overwhelming them. "Can we pet him?" Noah asked, his voice hushed with reverence. "He would like that very much," Sarah said. "Just be gentle." Small hands reached out and touched Max's fur with almost comical carefulness. The Belgian Malinois endured the attention with good grace, his tail swishing slowly against the grass, his dark eyes soft with the contentment of a job well appreciated. "He's so soft," Ethan whispered. "He remembers you," Sarah said, which wasn't entirely true, but felt right nonetheless. "He helped find your mommy, and he's glad to see you're both doing so well." The boys beamed at her, their faces shining with a joy that had no comprehension of how close they had come to losing everything. They saw only the dog, only the police lady from their mother's story, only the happy ending that had become their reality. "Thank you for bringing our mommy back," Noah said with the solemn gravity that only children can muster. "You're the best police lady ever." Sarah knelt to bring herself to their eye level. "I had a lot of help. Lots of police officers worked very hard to find her, but Max did the most important work. He followed your mommy's scent and led us right to her." "Max is a hero," Ethan declared. "Yes," Sarah agreed. "He is." She stayed for 2 hours, longer than she had intended, drawn into conversations with Elena and Dorothy, and some of the other parents who had heard the story of the twins' mother's rescue. She answered questions about police work and canine training, and the day-to-day reality of her job. She ate a hot dog and a piece of fire truck cake and watched as Noah and Ethan tore into their presents with the gleeful destruction that defined childhood. When it was time to leave, Elena walked her to the front yard, away from the noise and bustle of the party. "I never properly thanked you," Elena said. "Not really. Not for everything. You thanked me plenty. Words aren't enough. What you did, what you risked, coming into that warehouse when you could have waited for backup, when the safe thing would have been to let someone else take the lead, that saved my life. Those men were talking about what to do with me. I heard them. They had decided I was too much of a risk to keep alive. If you had waited another hour, I wouldn't be here. My boys would have grown up without their mother." Sarah didn't know how to respond. The tactical decision to enter the warehouse had been based on assessment and instinct, the same calculus she performed on every operation. She hadn't thought about heroism or sacrifice. She had thought about a woman in danger and 2 children waiting at home. "I was doing my job," she finally said. "Your job saved my family. That makes it more than a job. That makes it a calling." Elena embraced her, a quick, fierce hug that communicated more than words ever could. Then she stepped back, wiping her eyes, and smiled. "Take care of yourself, Sarah, and take care of that wonderful dog. He deserves all the treats and belly rubs in the world." Sarah loaded Max into her personal vehicle, a modest sedan that was considerably less impressive than her work SUV. As she drove away from the party, she glanced in the rearview mirror and saw Noah and Ethan waving from the porch, their stuffed elephants, the same ones they had clutched during those terrible days, tucked under their arms. She waved back, though they probably couldn't see her through the window. Some cases stayed with you forever. Some victims became permanent residents in your memory, their faces appearing in quiet moments, their stories intertwined with your own. The Vance case was one of those. It had tested Sarah's skills, pushed her limits, forced her to make decisions under pressure that could have gone wrong in 100 different ways. But it had gone right. Elena was alive, the twins were thriving, justice had been served, and that, in the end, was why Sarah Collins wore the badge. She reached over and scratched Max behind the ears. He leaned into her touch, his eyes half closed with pleasure, his breathing slow and content. "Good boy," she murmured. "You're such a good boy." The Atlanta skyline rose before them as they drove toward home, glass and steel gleaming in the afternoon sun. Somewhere in that maze of buildings and streets, another case was waiting. Another victim needed help. Another story was about to begin. But for now, there was just the road and the radio and the quiet companionship of a partner who asked for nothing more than to be beside her. For now, that was enough. The summer that followed was one of the busiest of Sarah's career. A serial burglar targeting elderly residents in Buckhead. A drug trafficking ring operating out of a chain of seemingly legitimate restaurants. A missing teenager who turned out to have run away to join an online cult. Case after case, each one demanding everything she and Max had to give. The burglar case consumed 3 weeks of intensive investigation. The perpetrator, a former home healthcare worker named Dennis Pratt, had been using his previous employment to identify vulnerable targets. He knew which homes had alarm systems and which didn't, which elderly residents lived alone and which had frequent visitors, which neighborhoods had active watch programs and which were more complacent. His victims were terrified, their sense of safety shattered by violations that went beyond mere property theft. Sarah and Max tracked Pratt through a maze of pawnshops and fencing operations, following the trail of stolen jewelry and electronics that he had been converting to cash. The breakthrough came when Max alerted on a storage unit that Pratt had rented under a false name, leading to the discovery of items from 17 different burglaries. Pratt was arrested without incident, a small man whose mugshot showed neither remorse nor defiance, only the empty gaze of someone who had stopped caring about consequences long ago. The restaurant case was more complex. involving multiple jurisdictions and an undercover operation that lasted nearly 2 months. Sarah's role was primarily investigative rather than tactical, analyzing patterns in shipping manifests and financial records that reminded her uncomfortably of the Meridian Logistics case. The criminal mind, she reflected, was not particularly creative. The same schemes appeared again and again, varying in sophistication, but not in essence. Greed wore many masks, but its face was always recognizable. The missing teenager, a 16-year-old girl named Jessica Chen, had been lured into an online community that promised spiritual enlightenment and unconditional acceptance. Sarah found her in a commune in rural Tennessee, thin and hollow-eyed, but physically unharmed. The reunion with her parents was difficult to watch, a mixture of relief and recrimination that would take years to fully resolve. Through it all, she thought occasionally of the Vance family, wondered how the twins were adjusting to first grade, whether Elena had found someone to share her life with, whether Dorothy's garden was flourishing in the Georgia heat. Small thoughts, passing thoughts, the kind of mental postcards that accumulated in the corners of a busy mind. She didn't expect to see them again. The nature of police work was transactional in many ways. You entered people's lives during their worst moments, you did what you could to help, and then you moved on to the next crisis. Lasting connections were rare, treasured when they occurred, but never anticipated. So when her phone rang on a humid August evening and Eleanor's name appeared on the screen, Sarah felt a flutter of surprise that was not entirely pleasant. Late-night calls from former victims were almost never good news. "Elena, is everything okay?" "Everything is fine, Sarah, better than fine." Elena's voice was bright, almost giddy. "I'm sorry to call so late, but I just had to tell someone, and you were the first person I thought of." "Tell me what?" "I'm getting married." Sarah laughed with relief, the tension draining from her shoulders. "Elena, that's wonderful. Congratulations." "His name is David. He's a teacher at the boys' school. We've been dating for 6 months, and he proposed tonight at dinner." The boys were there. They helped him plan the whole thing. Noah handed him the ring box, and Ethan made a speech about how much they wanted Daddy. And the image painted itself in Sarah's mind. A restaurant somewhere in Atlanta, a nervous man kneeling beside a table, 2 small boys bursting with barely contained excitement, a woman who had survived the worst moments of her life, finally finding a chance at happiness. "I'm so happy for you," Sarah said, and meant it completely. "You deserve this." The wedding is in October. Small ceremony. Just family and close friends. I know it's a lot to ask, but I would be so honored if you would come. You and Max. You're part of our family now, Sarah. You gave us our future. I want you to see what we've built with it. Sarah hesitated only briefly. "We'll be there." The wedding was held in a small chapel in Decatur, surrounded by trees that had begun their autumn transformation. Sarah wore a dress for the first time in longer than she could remember, a simple navy blue that felt foreign against her skin. Max wore a bow tie that Elena's sons had picked out, a ridiculous red and white striped thing that made him look like a canine candy cane. The ceremony was brief and beautiful. David was a tall man with kind eyes and a gentle voice, the sort of person who radiated patience and stability. When he recited his vows, promising to love and protect not just Eleanor, but Noah and Ethan as well, Sarah saw the boys' faces light up with a joy that transcended anything she had witnessed at their birthday party. The minister spoke of new beginnings and second chances, of families formed not just by blood, but by choice and circumstance. His words were traditional, perhaps even cliched, but they carried a weight that only the assembled guests could fully appreciate. Everyone in that chapel knew what Elena had survived. Everyone understood that this wedding was more than a union between 2 people. It was a declaration that trauma did not have the final word. David's vows were personal, specific, clearly written from the heart. He spoke of the first time he had seen Elena at a parent-teacher conference, how her tired smile and fierce devotion to her sons had captured something in him that he hadn't known was waiting to be captured. He spoke of the slow building of trust between them, the patient months of coffee dates and conversations, the moment he had realized that he wanted to be part of her story, whatever that story might hold. And then he turned to Noah and Ethan, who stood beside their mother in miniature versions of his own dark suit, their faces solemn with the gravity of the occasion. "And to you too," David said, his voice catching slightly. "I promise to be there, for homework and bad dreams and scraped knees, for baseball games and birthday parties and all the adventures we haven't imagined yet. I promise to protect you, to guide you, and to love you as if you were my own, because from this day forward, you are." The twins exchanged a glance that communicated volumes in the silent language of siblinghood. Then Noah stepped forward and took David's hand. "We promise to be good," he said, his small voice carrying through the hushed chapel, "and to let you help with our homework." Ethan nodded earnestly. "And we promise to share Max with you when Miss Sarah brings him to visit." Laughter rippled through the assembled guests, breaking the tension of emotion that had been building toward overflow. David knelt and pulled both boys into a hug that seemed to encompass not just the present moment, but all the moments that would follow, all the years of family they were about to build together. Elena watched them with tears streaming freely down her face, her bouquet trembling in hands that had once been bound with zip ties in a basement cell. This was what survival looked like. Sarah thought again. This was what survival looked like, not just breathing, not just existing, but building something new from the wreckage of trauma. Elena had been kidnapped, terrorized, brought to the edge of death. And now she stood in a white dress, exchanging rings with a man who would help her raise her sons, creating a family that would never have existed if things had gone differently. If Sarah had waited in that warehouse, if Max hadn't followed the scent, if 1,000 small decisions had broken differently. The butterfly effect of police work. Every choice mattered, every moment counted, every life saved rippled outward in ways that could never be fully measured. After the ceremony, during the modest reception in the chapel's fellowship hall, Noah and Ethan found Sarah at her table near the back of the room. Max lay at her feet, having survived the bow tie with his dignity mostly intact. "Miss Sarah," Noah said, using the honorific that children in the South bestowed on respected adults, "do you remember when you saved our mommy?" "I remember. We tell that story at school sometimes. Our teacher says it's very brave what you did." "It was very brave what your mommy did," Sarah corrected gently. "She survived a scary thing and protected you boys by leaving clues for us to follow. She's the brave one." "Mommy says you're all brave," Ethan contributed. "She says brave people help each other. Your mommy is a smart woman." The boys nodded with the absolute certainty of children who had learned to trust their mother's wisdom. Then Ethan's expression shifted to something more serious. "Miss Sarah, can I ask you a question?" "Of course." "If bad people try to take Mommy again, will you and Max come save her?" The question pierced Sarah's chest like a needle. This was the legacy of trauma, the invisible wound that never fully healed. These boys, for all their joy and resilience, carried the knowledge that the world could turn cruel without warning. They had learned too young that safety was not guaranteed, that mothers could disappear, that nightmares could become real. Sarah knelt so she could meet Ethan's eyes directly. "I want you to listen to me very carefully, okay? What happened to your mommy was very rare. Most people go their whole lives without anything like that happening to them, and your mommy is safe now. The bad people who took her are in jail, and they're going to stay there for a very long time. But what if other bad people come? Then the police will be there to help. That's what we do. That's our job. We protect people and catch bad guys, and Max, he's one of the best at finding people who need help. So if anyone ever needs us, we'll be there. Promise?" Sarah extended her pinky finger, an oath that Ethan understood immediately. He hooked his own small finger around hers, sealing the vow. "Promise." Noah joined in, wrapping his pinky around both of theirs, making it a three-way pact. Max, not wanting to be excluded, pushed his nose into the huddle, his tail wagging at the human ritual he couldn't quite comprehend. "You too, Max," Noah declared. "You're part of the promise." "He takes his promises very seriously," Sarah assured them. "Just like me." Satisfied, the boys ran off to rejoin the celebration, leaving Sarah alone with her thoughts and her partner. She scratched Max's ears, watching the reception unfold around her. Elena dancing with David, Dorothy wiping tears from her eyes, children running between tables high on sugar and excitement, a room full of people celebrating the persistence of hope. "This is why I do it," Sarah thought. "This moment, right here. This is the answer to every doubt, every sleepless night, every decision that haunts me in the dark. Because sometimes, against all odds, the good guys win." The drive home was quiet. Max dozed in the back seat, his bow tie removed and stuffed in Sarah's purse. The Atlanta skyline glittered against the night sky, a familiar constellation of man-made stars that never failed to stir something in Sarah's chest. She thought about the Vance case, about the 18 months that had passed since that autumn morning when her phone had first buzzed with Captain Morrison's call. So much had changed. The world had kept spinning, indifferent to the drama that had unfolded in its warehouses and alleys and courtrooms. But for one family, everything was different. For two little boys, the future had been rewritten. Because someone answered the phone, because a dog followed a scent, because a woman refused to give up. Sarah pulled into her apartment complex and parked in her assigned spot. She let Max out and walked him to the small patch of grass where he conducted his nightly business. The air was warm and thick with the sounds of the city. Traffic murmured in the distance. Someone's television played through an open window. A couple argued on a balcony 3 floors up. Normal life, ordinary moments. The background noise of a world that kept turning regardless of the crises that erupted within it. Max finished his business and looked up at her with expectant eyes, ready for the treat that always followed their evening walk. Sarah fished a biscuit from her pocket and watched him crunch it with satisfied enthusiasm. "You did good today," she told him. "You wore that ridiculous bow tie, and you didn't complain once. I'm proud of you." Max's tail wagged. Whether he understood her words or simply responded to her tone, the result was the same. Connection, partnership, the bond between human and animal that had saved countless lives and would save countless more. They climbed the stairs to Sarah's third-floor apartment, Max's claws clicking on the concrete steps with a rhythm that had become as familiar as her own heartbeat. Inside, she poured herself a glass of water and stood at the window, looking out at the city she had sworn to protect. Tomorrow would bring new cases, new victims, new chances to make a difference. The phone would ring and she would answer because that's what she had always done, what she would always do until the day came when she couldn't anymore. But tonight she allowed herself to simply be, to exist in the quiet space between crises, to remember the faces of Noah and Ethan, their pinky fingers wrapped around hers, their trust absolute and humbling, to remember why she had become a cop in the first place. Max settled into his bed in the corner, his eyes already closing, his breathing evening out into the slow rhythm of sleep. Sarah watched him for a moment, this animal who had become her closest companion, her most reliable partner, her reason for waking up on the days when the darkness threatened to overwhelm. "Good night, buddy," she whispered. His tail thumped once against the bed. A response, an acknowledgement, a connection. Sarah turned off the lights and let the city's glow fill her apartment with soft shadows. Tomorrow would come soon enough, with all its challenges and demands and impossible choices. But tonight, there was peace. Tonight, that was enough. 3 weeks after the wedding, Sarah received a package at the precinct. It was addressed in a child's careful handwriting, the letters uneven but legible. She opened it at her desk, while Max watched with curious interest. Inside was a framed photograph, Elena and David on their wedding day, the twins standing before them in miniature suits, all 4 of them beaming at the camera with unrestrained joy. Beneath the photo, written in crayon on construction paper, were 2 messages. "Thank you for keeping your promise. Love, Noah." "Max is the best dog ever. Love, Ethan." Sarah propped the frame on her desk where she could see it every day, a reminder, a touchstone, a reason to keep going when the job seemed impossible. Captain Morrison noticed it during their afternoon briefing. "The Vance family. They got married. The boys sent this." Morrison studied the photograph for a long moment, his weathered face unreadable. Then he nodded slowly. "That's the job, Collins. Right there in that frame. That's the whole damn job." "Yes, sir, it is." He left without another word, but Sarah caught the slight softening around his eyes that indicated approval. In Morrison's economy of expression, it was practically a standing ovation. She looked at the photograph again, at the faces of the people she had helped save. Elena, radiant in white. David, proud and protective. Noah and Ethan, finally secure in the knowledge that their family was complete. Then she looked at Max, who was watching her with the patient devotion that defined his existence. "Ready to get back to work?" He rose immediately, his body language shifting from rest to alert in the span of a heartbeat. He was always ready, always willing, always her partner in every sense of the word. Sarah clipped his lead to his harness and headed for the door. Outside, the city waited. Crimes to solve, people to protect, justice to pursue. Just another day in Atlanta, just another chance to make a difference. Together, they walked into whatever came next. The autumn light was fading when Sarah finally clocked out that evening, painting the precinct parking lot in shades of amber and rose. It had been a long day, filled with paperwork and court appearances and the tedious administrative duties that comprise so much of modern police work. No heroics, no dramatic rescues. Just the grinding machinery of justice, turning slowly but inexorably forward. Max waited for her at the door of her SUV, his tail wagging with the enthusiasm of a dog who knew that going home meant dinner and maybe a game of fetch in the apartment complex's small courtyard. Sarah let him in and stood for a moment, breathing the cool evening air, watching the last light fade from the sky. Her phone buzzed with a text from Elena. "The boys made you something at school. Can we drop it off this weekend?" Sarah smiled and typed her response. "I would love that." She climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine. The radio crackled to life with routine traffic, the endless soundtrack of a city that never truly slept. Somewhere out there, people were in trouble. Somewhere crimes were being committed. Somewhere victims were waiting for someone to help. But not tonight. Tonight was for rest, for recovery, for the simple pleasures of a meal and a quiet evening and the company of a loyal partner. Tomorrow would come soon enough. Sarah pulled out of the parking lot and headed home. Max settled contentedly in the back seat, the city lights blooming around them like earthbound stars. In her mind's eye, she saw Elena and her family, saw the twins with their construction paper messages, saw the photograph that now occupied a place of honor on her desk. "This is why we do it," she thought again. "This is the answer." And it always would be. The end was really just another beginning, Sarah had learned over her years on the force. Cases closed, but their effects lingered, rippling outward through time in ways that could never be fully traced. The Vance case had ended with arrests and convictions, with a family reunited and a criminal network dismantled. But its true conclusion, if such a thing existed, was still being written in the lives of everyone it had touched. Elena's new husband David became a volunteer with an organization that supported families of crime victims. He said the experience had shown him how fragile life could be, and how important it was to help others navigate their darkest moments. The boys, Noah and Ethan, grew up with a heightened awareness of the dangers that existed in the world, but also with an unshakable faith in the people who worked to combat them. Dorothy Vance continued tending her garden and spoiling her grandsons, though she now kept a closer eye on the street outside her window, a permanent vigilance that was the price of knowing how quickly everything could change. She sent Sarah Christmas cards every year, handwritten notes of gratitude that accumulated in a drawer of Sarah's desk, like artifacts from another life. Raymond Garrett served 14 years of a 20-year sentence before being released on good behavior. Sarah heard through the law enforcement grapevine that he had relocated to a small town in Nebraska, working as a cashier at a hardware store, trying to rebuild a life that his choices had destroyed. She felt nothing for him, neither hatred nor sympathy, just the neutral acknowledgement that justice had been served and the universe had continued its indifferent rotation. Carlos Vega, the Miami financier who had ordered Elena's kidnapping, died in federal prison of a heart attack 3 years into his 40-year sentence. The news barely registered with Sarah when she heard it. He had been a name on a case file, a face in a courtroom, a representative of the evil that humans were capable of inflicting on one another. His death changed nothing about the past he had created, and Max, the Belgian Malinois who had tracked Elena's scent through alleys and tunnels, who had subdued the man who would have killed her, who had worn a ridiculous bow tie to a wedding because 2 little boys wanted him there, continued working alongside Sarah until his 9th year, when the accumulated mileage of his career finally caught up with him. The retirement ceremony was small, held in the K9 unit's training yard on a crisp February morning. Captain Morrison presented Max with a certificate of service and a new bed for his home. The other handlers and their dogs formed an honor guard, a canine and human assembly paying tribute to one of their most distinguished members. Sarah didn't cry during the ceremony, though her eyes burned with the effort of containment. She had known this day was coming, had prepared herself for the transition, had already begun the process of bonding with her new partner, a young Malinois named Axel, who showed the same promise that Max had demonstrated in his youth. But knowing and accepting were different things, separated by a chasm that logic could never bridge. After the ceremony, she took Max home and let him explore the apartment as if seeing it for the first time. He moved slowly now, his joints stiff and his muzzle completely grey. But his eyes still held the same intelligence that had made him such an extraordinary partner. He sniffed the corners, investigated his new bed, and finally settled in his favourite spot by the window, where the afternoon sun created a warm rectangle of light. Sarah sat beside him on the floor, her back against the wall, her hand resting on his shoulder. "You did good," she told him. "You did so good." Max's tail wagged weakly, a shadow of its former enthusiasm, but no less sincere. "Remember the Vance case? The lady and her twins? You found her, Max. You saved her life. That family exists because of you." He didn't understand the words, of course, but something in her tone must have communicated itself, because he shifted closer to her, his head coming to rest on her thigh, his eyes looking up at her with an expression that needed no translation. Love, trust, partnership, the bonds that transcended species and speech. Sarah sat there until the sun moved and the rectangle of light shifted away from them, leaving them in comfortable shadow. She thought about all the cases they had worked together, all the miles they had covered, all the moments of terror and triumph that had defined their years of service. And she thought about Elena Vance, and Noah and Ethan, and the photograph on her desk that captured a moment of pure joy born from the ashes of tragedy. This is why we did it, she thought. This is the answer to everything. The Belgian Malinois had been more than a partner. He had been a bridge between Sarah's professional obligations and her emotional needs. A living creature whose loyalty demanded nothing except presence and returned everything in devotion. Through the hardest cases and the darkest nights, Max had been there. Through the victories and the failures, the rescues and the losses, he had walked beside her without judgment or complaint. Now his walking days were ending, and Sarah felt the approaching loss like a wound that hadn't yet opened, but whose pain she could already anticipate. Veterinarians spoke in gentle euphemisms about quality of life and comfort measures, but the message was clear enough. Max's time was measured in months now, perhaps weeks. The cancer that had begun in his lymph nodes had spread despite treatment, and there was nothing more to be done except make his remaining days as peaceful as possible. She had known this moment would come. Every canine handler knew it. The dogs burned bright and burned fast, giving everything they had to the work, and then they faded. It was the covenant of the partnership, the price of the bond. You accepted the grief as payment for the years of service, and you tried to honor their memory by continuing the work they had made possible. Max let out a long, contented sigh and closed his eyes. His breathing slowed, deepened, became the rhythm of peaceful sleep. Sarah stayed with him, her hand on his fur, her heart full of memories that would last the rest of her life. Some stories had happy endings. This was one of them. The photograph of Elena's wedding stayed on Sarah's desk through 3 office relocations, 2 promotions, and 15 more years of service. It was there when she made detective. It was there when she was promoted to sergeant. It was there when she finally took over Captain Morrison's position after his retirement. And it was there on her last day, when she packed up her belongings and prepared to enter the next chapter of her own life. Noah and Ethan were grown by then, young men in their 20s, with careers and relationships and lives that stretched ahead of them full of possibility. They still sent cards sometimes, still visited when their schedules allowed, still referred to Sarah as Miss Sarah, despite her protests that such formality was unnecessary. They had become, against all odds, something like family. Elena and David had welcomed a daughter together, a bright-eyed girl named Hope, who knew the story of her brother's rescue like a family legend, passed down through retellings that had smoothed its edges into something almost mythic. The police lady and her dog who saved Mommy before we were born. Max had passed away peacefully in his sleep 4 years after his retirement, surrounded by the comfort of his home and the presence of the human who had been his partner and best friend. Sarah had buried him in a quiet corner of a pet cemetery on the outskirts of the city, beneath a marker that read simply, Max, partner, hero, friend. She visited him sometimes when the weight of the job became too heavy and she needed to remember why she had chosen this life. And now the life was ending, at least in its current form. 30 years of service, 30 years of cases and victims and moments that would stay with her forever. 30 years of answering phones at dawn and making promises to frightened families and following evidence wherever it led. It was enough. It was more than enough. Captain Sarah Collins, soon to be retired, stood at the window of her office and looked out at the Atlanta skyline one last time. The city glittered in the evening light, beautiful and dangerous and endlessly complex. She had given it everything she had. Now it was time to let someone else carry the weight. On her desk, the photograph of the Vance family waited to be packed. She picked it up and studied the faces she had come to know so well. Elena's radiant smile, David's protective stance, the twins in their tiny suits, their faces shining with hope. And beside them all, in spirit, if not in frame, the memory of a Belgian Malinois who had followed a scent through an autumn morning and changed everything. "Thank you," Sarah whispered to the photograph, "for showing me why it mattered." She packed it carefully in the box with her other treasures and carried it to her car. Tomorrow she would sleep late for the first time in decades. Tomorrow she would begin the slow process of becoming a civilian again, of finding new purposes and new meanings to fill the space left by a career that had defined her entire adult life. But tonight, she would drive home through the city she loved, past streets and buildings that held 1,000 memories. She would remember the cases and the colleagues and the partners who had shared the journey. She would think about Elena Vance and her twins, about promises kept and lives saved, and the ripple effects that spread from every act of courage and compassion. And she would know with absolute certainty that it had all been worth it, every moment, every choice, every step of the way. This was the answer. This was always the answer. In the end, what mattered was not the medals or the promotions or the accolades that accumulated over a career. What mattered was the people you helped, the lives you touched, the moments of darkness that you illuminated with whatever light you could muster. Sarah started her car and pulled out of the parking lot for the final time. The city wrapped around her like an old friend, familiar and full of secrets. Behind her, a new captain would take her place. New officers would walk the streets she had walked. New dogs would follow scents through alleys and tunnels and warehouses. And somewhere, right now, a family sat together in a modest house in the suburbs, whole and safe and happy. Because 18 years ago, a woman answered her phone and made a promise. Cute twin boys recognize their mum at first sight. Then the police chief brings her home in tears, and somewhere a retired lieutenant smiles as she drives toward whatever comes next, carrying with her the knowledge that some stories, the best stories, really do have happy endings. That was enough. That was everything.